Audit Committee. As you can expect, we have apologies from Councillor Stewart as the chair, so I am once again stepping in. And welcome to Councillor Liz Greenfield. Lynn, sorry. Welcome, and I'm inferring that you will be joining the committee permanently following the next full council.
I'm not sure yet. I've never worked in the public sector, so it was suggested that I attend as many committees as possible to understand what they all do and work out what best suits my skills. Okay, that's a great way to go into it, but I'm slightly worried that the inference is that once you've attended a committee, you'll know what's going on. I still don't, and here I am. Okay, we've got quite a big agenda tonight, and it sounds like Councillor Duris will be keeping us all entertained with questions. So I will kick straight off with apologies for absence. I've mentioned Councillor Stewart. Declarations of interest. Check if there's any for that. No. Okay. Minutes and actions from the last meeting. There were no actions. The last meeting was the 27th of November. I only know that because Trudy's put the minutes in front of me. So I think we've all probably forgotten the last meeting, but hopefully everyone has had a chance to look at those minutes and confirm that we're happy to accept them. Agreed. Okay. I will sign those. Agenda item 5 is our first report today, which is our Home England compliance report. Nigel is going to speak to that one. You get all the glory.
So just for the committee, this is here for noting more than anything else. We had an audit from Homes England. We got the green stamp of approval. Which is good. What does that mean? That means that when we continue to bid for Homes England funding, we'll be looked at in a good light in terms of how we deal with their finances, particularly as it was a little bit of a kind of sprung-on audit that we agreed to. So from that perspective, lots of kudos, lots of positive notes for the service, not necessarily for finance or myself, and it's good news in terms of future submissions. This report has also been to the Housing Scrutiny Group as well, but this is here just ensuring that the Audit Committee has seen all compliance and audits that take place in the organisation, just as we normally would.
Thank you for that summary, and as you're presenting it, we'll convey the committee's thanks and congratulations to the team on getting an exemplary result on that one. I do have a tiny point that I did just want to say, so it's not specifically on this report, but when I've looked at the timings of it, it's quite new, it's quite recent. I am interested to know what the council process is when we get the initial report back from the auditors. There is we will generally have some time on there, and we actually do have it in the timetable there for officers to respond to the initial reports. But it looks like that's come to us without us being able to see if the officers / managers did have any comments on that. So I did just want to check that how do I phrase it? As a process, before a report comes to this committee, we should always see any response that the responsible team has to that audit internally as well.
So as you can see from the time frame, I think it's in section 8, it's quite early on in the report, section 2 of the report. Because the audit was very clean and very short in terms of recommendations and outputs, the service was able to receive it on the 17th of January and get it to scrutiny only about 10 days later. So there was no real feedback from the service. They were just very happy that they got a green rating, and Homes England had no serious recommendations for us to implement going forward or on the other projects that we've got, because we have got circa 20 million and that will be increasing of Homes England money. So from that perspective, the service was just happy with the outcome. And with no significant recommendations, there was no significant response from officers.
So does anyone have any questions? Councillor Duris.
Well, it's only a comment, really. I think it's worth noting and noting for recording in the minutes that we've been given a green grade, and the green grade is the highest possible grade you can get. So I think all credit to those who are responsible for this and the housing. And I think that's worth mentioning. I would take issue, if I may, Rick, with your request, because I think if you're, as I'm hearing you say, if you want to see the interim comments from management and then auditors, potentially it will go backwards and forwards. And I'm satisfied that we have enough nous, if you like, and experience to be able to interrogate between the lines of the report without actually having to see all the back workings of it. So I personally wouldn't support your suggestion, because, as I say, I think I'm not trying to hide anything, and officers and internal auditor will know that I'm probably well known for digging away if I feel it's appropriate. So that's my comment.
Okay, well, I'll just advance the discussion on that, because we'll see how people feel. Obviously, this particular report is a very good one to use as an example, because as Nigel has said, that there aren't any sort of comments that the officers will want to make. Now, it is my feeling, and again, I'm speaking personally on this, as an audit committee, that the key task that we are doing is to make sure that any internal or external sort of judgments or pieces of advice that we are hearing is being considered, hopefully being actioned by officers. So basically, if I've got one report in my hand that is telling me something, but I know that the conversations have already happened with the officers about the things that will pop up, and yes, there are going to be a few of those in the internal audit on that. Our role as the audit committee is to ensure that we are making use of that information, and that basically means making sure that the services that are affected by the opinions on here have some way of considering that and putting it into action. So essentially, if I'm getting a report that sort of has somebody acknowledging the comments and possibly sort of owning some actions or suggesting ways that they are working on it, that kind of demonstrates to me what is going on, and it makes our consideration of the report easier. I guess I just welcome anybody else's comments on.
Can I come back on that?
Yeah.
You said at the beginning of that if you'd had conversations with any of the officers that had raised concerns or raised questions in your own mind, I would argue that if any of us had had a conversation with any of the officers or had gained any feeling of information that was questionable to us, we would actually interrogate those officers accordingly, because that's part of, if you like, it. My only point to you was, in your initial thing, you were suggesting that we would probably see the audit trail of discussion, and that's what I'm saying, really.
Okay, no, I'm not interested in an audit trail. All I'm interested in is knowing that that the affected service had read and responded to the audit report. As I say, this one, because of the fact that there's probably nothing to respond to other than great, everything's fine, I was more commenting on the time frame, because this one finished quite recently. So what I'm doing is making sure that they had a chance to look at it and they said, yeah, that's fine. That's pretty much my only point. So I just want to make sure that as part of the process, that team sort of knows that the report is coming to us, and so they have had a chance to feed into it.
So just come back some really useful points in there. If there's any significant changes to what we do, it'd be reported to this audit committee. Obviously, I've had those conversations. There are no changes in terms of how we're reporting our finances, so it's even whiter than you can see in front of you. In terms of the service, we obviously had those discussions with the service in terms of it coming here, and David Barrett was going to be here at one point, and to be fair, I stood David down thinking, you've been to scrutiny, and we've got a very big agenda, so it might not be worthwhile you coming. If there was, though, I would definitely have him here, and I'd probably be giving you questions to ask him.
Well, that's your job, Nigel, to bring the works to us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, do I have any other comments on item 5? Okay.
We're asked to note it, are we not?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 6, the External Auditor's Draft Annual Report. And for the great benefit of those who are new to joining the committee, we will look through it's quite a large report. For most of us, we have seen the initial draft report prior to the pension comment, but obviously it has been produced in full now that it is in the state that the external auditors are moving forward. So I'm assuming this is coming to you, Claire.
Yes, so this is our sort of final draft report. We're hoping to get signed off very shortly. Sophie is here from our external auditors, so she can give more of an update.
Welcome, Sophie.
Hi, thank you, Chair. So I'm happy to give a broad update, or I'm happy to talk through the papers that we've brought to the committee today. I'm happy either way. I suppose it's in the interest of time, whichever the committee feels most beneficial.
Do you want to start with a broad perspective, and then if members want to dig in, because I am very aware that this is not vastly different to the draft report the committee have gone through before, so I think a broad update and also where we're at right now as of today, really, because obviously there's some things we can update the committee with.
No, absolutely, that completely works for me. So we've brought 2 reports for you today, the first being our annual auditor's report. And this is kind of broken into 2 sections, the first being our value for money and the audit of the financial statements. I'll leave the financial statements for a moment whilst I talk through the value for money. So the assessment over the value for money is over the 3 domains, which you can see on page 17 of the pack. This isn't wildly different from what you've seen before. This is due to the fact that during our risk assessment that we brought to you at the end of summer, we identified no significant risks. So we haven't explored anything in addition to that, other than kind of concluding for our year-end procedures. And that involves things like checking you've got a 24-25 plan in place ahead of the 24-25 year, for instance, and commenting on how you landed at the end of the year. So a clean value for money opinion, which is very, very positive. Moving on to the financial statements, and again, this committee is incredibly well timed. As Claire said, we are hoping to sign very imminently. As you can see in the report, the paper is effectively finalised. The only thing we need to remove is the draft, and we would only do that once we've actually signed the opinion. So where we are up to as of today, our work is effectively concluded. We will need the signed accounts from yourselves to allow us to then sign once we have kind of checked through the final version. But in terms of issuing that opinion, we are ready to go, I suppose, as soon as we have those documents from yourself. It will be a clean opinion, which again is incredibly positive when you kind of look at the sector as it stands today. We are currently going through kind of a transition at KPMG, coming back into the sector, and we have seen there are many, many local authorities that are not in anywhere near a strong position as you. So again, credit to Decorum Council and this committee. So we do hope to issue that opinion by the end of this week. In terms of an overview of the accounts, the schedule of audit adjustments kind of speaks for itself. We only identified 3 adjustments other than some kind of small tweaks around things like pensions. And those misstatements covered 2 pension adjustments and 1 valuation adjustment over the investment property valuation. But again, none of those were material, and it's a very positive outcome to only see 3 misstatements, particularly in our first year. Happy to take any questions or go into anything in any greater detail.
Thank you, Sophie. Just for clarification, I think I know the answer, but this is just to make it noted. The assets which have been restated for the pension fund are those that sit with Herts County Council, not DBC. That's correct.
Yes, it's to do with the pass-through arrangement, I believe, and that's the reason why it sits kind of outside of decorum itself.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, got 150 pages. Surely we've got some additional questions and comments from...
None at all. It's an unqualified report. It is KPMG. I'm very happy with it. Done. Because we've seen it before. So don't waste time on it. Fine.
Okay.
Let me say one comment. I am equally, like Councillor Elliott, extremely happy with the report, particularly given the 3 misstatements or corrections are entirely outside of decorum finance team's controls in terms of the valuation of pensions and also the external independent valuers having a difference of opinion with the KPMG valuers. These things happen, but there's absolutely nothing that from my perspective my team could have done, even though these are very minor misstatements. They're completely out of control. So again, a fantastic piece of work by the finance team in terms of delivering this. And it will be very interesting. We will find out for the committee in about 2 weeks' time how few councils are actually signing off 23-24 by the deadline. I suspect it'll be in single-digit percentages, so we will be very much at the top end of that, particularly with unqualified opinions, not modified opinions. So from that perspective, we should be in a very strong place. And equally, what I would say is, Sophie made a comment there about, the first year a new auditor coming in, and we've already found 3 things. I can tell you from experience, the first year an external auditor comes in, they try to find absolutely everything because they can pin it on the previous external auditor. And so from that perspective, that's a very positive outcome, particularly given, some of these things. I'm not going to go into the technical details of them, but calculating an asset ceiling and 2 actuaries effectively having 2 different viewpoints. You could put them in a room for 3 years and they'll still never agree what their viewpoint is. So yeah, from that perspective, very, very good outcome, particularly given last year, although not through our doing, we had to have later account sign off than we would normally do. It's back to where decorum wants to be, which is top of the tree.
Thank you. So we have previously passed on our congratulations to the team for the audit opinion. So those continue, and it's good to see that is consistent. Councillor Duris.
I guess you'd expect me to say something. I've got two things on page, and this is just information. On page 32, it makes a reference to there were no deep dives, although we normally do deep dives. Was there any reason why we shouldn't do any or we didn't do any deep dives? I know you only put that in so to see if I read it.
Just for Sophie's assistance, is that on the governance on page 17 of the...
No, it's on page 32.
There's 2 of our pack, but 17 of the KPMG.
Oh, yes, it will be, yeah.
I suppose is this a question for myself or for the wider committee? I suppose I wouldn't know why there were no deep dives in 23-24.
No, I've just seen it. That is because we have just started off a strategic risk review of all our strategic risks, which started the other night with members, and we'll be meeting again just before the next audit committee. And after that session, I think it's the 11th of March, I will bring a report back here with some of the initial thinking from that group for the audit committee to give their thoughts and views on the potential kind of strategic risks that are coming out of that. And at that point, we can have that kind of deeper dive, because we have the Q3 strategic risk of all those existing ones as part of that process. So we review the backward-looking and the forward-looking. So we're doing a kind of one project rather than sporadic kind of deep dives, just to get a clean starting point for 25-26.
Okay, and one other question, then a comment. Page 19 of the auditor's pack, it talks about head of internal audit opinion, reasonable assurance. That's you, I guess, isn't it?
I guess it would be, yes.
Yeah. Could we be any better than reasonable?
No.
That's all right. Thank you. That's good. And just checking. And I would absolutely share the comments that are made regarding the support, the work of the team, the finance team. I think it's an absolutely exemplary thing. And having seen a number of external auditors come in, I share and I agree entirely with you that when they come in, the first thing they do, even internal auditors, did you notice as well, they give a raft of things just to see if we're on the ball. So really well done, absolutely well done. And on the basis of that, I would like to propose that we get comms team to actually put out a press release saying, you know, that we are pretty good. In fact, we're more than pretty good. And it's, you know, we've done a good job and the officers have done a brilliant job.
That's something I can speak to the comms team about. You know, we should, you know, sing from the rooftops in terms of fiscal stewardship is something that residents and businesses care about, and the fact that we are very strong in that area is something that will give, hopefully, residents and businesses real comfort.
Especially when you hear of some other local authorities who A, don't meet the timescale, and B, don't produce proper accounts, or they have queries on them, and because these are unqualified and they're in date. You can't get any better than that.
No.
Never happened to your business, did it?
It did actually. No, because I can say this because I was the first chair of the internal. I was chair of the internal audit committee at the first time after a period of challenges to actually have our accounts signed off in an orderly manner without unqualified. For your time, but I was very proud of that, and I stick to that. So there.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification, Councillor Duris.
Okay, right, well, thanks once again, Sophie. I think that closes off item 6. And I'm afraid that might be the end of our sort of great news and patting ourselves on the back, because now we move on to our summary internal controls assurance report that will allow Philip to introduce, and I suspect we'll have more questions.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, I mean, like, there's still good news here. So, but let me talk to it in a little bit more detail. So, if I prelude by saying that we only completed one audit since the previous audit committee, that's private sector housing. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but probably just worth kind of talking to the plan in general before I go through talking about the individual audit. So the plan in general is in Appendix B, progress against the audit plan. You'll notice that we have completed, i.e. finalised, about half of the audits that are down there. Many of the others are either draft or towards the end of in progress. I've got no concerns about the state of progress of the individual audits. I anticipate that most of the ones that are in progress will be completed for the next audit committee, so we'll probably have a little bit more to talk about for that audit committee. And I anticipate all of them will be completed by the time of the year end. So that is good news. I thought I'd start with good news. So now to talk about the audit report that's there. Worth highlighting by way of context that the audit is by exception. So there are like a range of tests that we undertake, and obviously you can only see the things that are reported negatively. Now, that's not to say that I don't take seriously the issues that have been highlighted within this report, because they are serious. It's a serious topic with weighty impact. It is worth highlighting that the issues that have been talked about within this body of this report are largely assurance-based. So they are issues where things have gone wrong, but had the assurance process been operating effectively, they would have been picked up as they went along, and that would have been supported through the system SICA, which is highlighted within the report. I'm not going to talk in detail about the observations, partly because I anticipate that I might be asked questions about them in response to having paused for breath in about 3 minutes' time. However, what I will say is that management responses are quite reasonable, I believe, in relation to the topic. So they're not seeking to minimise the observations, and they, I believe, should give you a good sense of assurance that going forward that the issues highlighted shouldn't occur again. Also worth highlighting that the observations that have been made, I believe that they have identified the root cause either during the testing or within the management response. So I believe you can also draw some peace of mind in respect of that. Finally, just wanted to say that this is actually version kind of 2.5 of the report that you have seen. So it was issued as a final. Management came back with additional responses, and you have seen an additional version provided to you today. Just worth highlighting, if you were concerned, that's not to say we removed any additional recommendations or removed anything from the body of the report. So it's just management provided a little bit of additional context in respect of some of the narrative within the executive summary and within the detailed body of the report. But I don't believe it changes to any degree the document that you see presented for you today. But it is important that management have a chance to provide, in an iterative sense, a document that everybody's happy with, in order that you can see, as you were alluding to earlier on, management responses, and you can see that fully in order that the full context is provided. I don't propose talking through in great detail at this stage because I anticipate there might be greater opportunity to do so. If it helps, though, I would point to the management responses and the executive summary page, where I believe I might be asked to talk through in a little bit more detail in a minute.
Thanks, Philip. So I'm just going to throw a question through to Nigel and Claire, just on process on this. I'll hold my hand up and say that that the responsibility on this probably sits with me as chair. I will confess that I went through the reports over the weekend to kind of get the side there. And having read this one, I did sort of suggest that it would be worth trying to have somebody from the team or the portfolio holder coming to us today. I'm just wondering if somebody in either Nigel's team or members' services who gets to see these reports before they go into the meeting pack might be able to make a judgment call, because when we've got a report like this where it is likely that there are some questions, or we're wanting to see some response in terms of what's going on with that, to invite them to be there. I did reach out, but I think I sent my messages out on Tuesday, so I'm not surprised that that hadn't been able to be arranged.
Yeah, and as the committee knows, I can't remember the last time we didn't have officers from the service here for one of these reports, but this was one of those where I'll put my hands up. I hadn't managed arranging somebody, and then when the request came yesterday from yourself, it was a little too late to get somebody here this evening. I am very well briefed. I can provide some answers if there are any questions, but if not, then we can see it at the next meeting in March if the committee would prefer that. What I would say is, the level 2 actions are already actioned at this point in time, and as Philip has outlined, there are some very detailed management comments in response that are, in my opinion, probably over and above what the recommendation is after, which shows the huge amount of work that is going on, particularly in this area. It is an area that is under a huge amount of scrutiny at the moment, and it is an area where, overall, the reasonable assurance was one that we were uplifted to receive.
Okay, do I have any questions or comments from? No. Okay.
Sorry, I think we're on, I hope we are anyway. Appendix B, the progress against the annual plan. Yeah?
I'm happy to take any questions around that.
Okay. I'm just looking that the financial resilience draft was on the 4th of October 2024, and it's not yet been finalised. Anything we should draw from that?
No, sometimes it does take a little bit of time to kind of I mean, like if there were particular financial resilience concerns, I mean, external audit would have talked through them, and we've got other audits which kind of like touch upon it. It's really just a case of we had some initial responses from Fiona and then just squaring those away. I don't think there's anything.
No, it should have been signed just before Fiona left in early December, and I thought it had been. And usually when I was doing my MTFS internal audit this week, it was raised, and I was like, send it through, we'll get it done. So the final comments will be done. There is nothing of significant risk in there. That is purely an admin with one person leaving and somebody else taking over, i.e. me.
Okay.
Okay. I also just want to make it clear. I think the work of your team, Philip, and the internal audit report is very good. It's been presented in a very thorough and actionable way, and I think it's kind of communicates your concerns, recommendations in a way that suits both me as a councillor and I imagine that the teams on that. So, you know, I will try to kind of raise the concerns on what's highlighted, but I think it's very good that they're being highlighted. Okay, so we will move on now to agenda item 8.
Sorry, would you indulge me?
Oh,
because,
of course I will.
I realised I had a question on page 59, which I think was the external auditor's report. I think.
Okay. Right. Well.
And
so Sophie is still with us. So okay.
Sophie is. And I just picked up and noticed that the fees that your excellent company are charging are almost 100% dearer than the previous one. And I just wondered what the reason for that was, because don't you have prescribed fee charges?
So PSAA, who do the re-procurement of audit services, implemented their re-procurement process, and new scale fees were brought in, which had increased by, on average for councils, 150%. That was partly to do with the significant issues in the audit sector, which were a lack of resources, a lack of interest from external companies like KPMG, apologies Sophie, in getting involved in the sector because there was very little money to be made from that. And so when they did the re-procurement for 23-24 and they went out, they had to set higher scale fees. Hence, our fees have gone up significantly. There was a growth request in the budget for 24-25 to cover off some of them. We didn't quite put enough in there, so we might have to go up for a little bit more in future years. It is a sector-wide issue. It is the solution or perceived solution to the problems we've got with a lack of resources and a lack of ability to hit the deadlines for local authorities. What the new PSAA contract has done is it's brought new companies into the sector. So I can't remember if KPMG were doing much beforehand. Sophie, I don't think you were in England, were you?
So within the sector, we had a handful of organisations that we audited, and I think these are ones that were procured outside of PSAA. You're absolutely right. We also did some outside of England, so we had a few Scottish authorities as well.
Yeah, and there's a couple of other companies that have also come into the marketplace. So there's less reliance now on a few bigger companies and more capacity in the sector. And also companies like KPMG have got more money to invest in training and retention, etc. So the idea is that will be part of the solution to resolve historical audit issues.
Thank you for indulging me in that question.
That's all right. Okay, so we'll now jump to agenda item 8, which is on page 169 of the pack. It is the assurance review of private sector housing. And I will come back to Philip, but I suspect we are going to be covering this pretty much identically to the way we covered the last item.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same, it's just the full body of the same report. So just in case anyone asked any detail about what was tested, there's a little bit more text there you know, so you can ask any questions around that. But if there are no questions in relation to that, it didn't seem there were from the summary I provided earlier, I wouldn't propose to go through that report at this stage.
Do we have any questions or comments?
The only comment I would make is that it's good to see in the management responses the word actioned and positive things. I know that there have been occasions in the past where it's been slightly dodged, shall we say. So these are very open, very honest, and I think well written.
Is that not Elon Musk's department, Dodge?
Yeah. Who?
Yes, I know the.
Okay, we won't go down that rabbit hole, right? Or I personally won't stop ranting. Okay, so we're going to thank Philip for that report, and then we'll move on to item 9, which I'll get the title in a second, but is effectively the strategy for internal audit going forward. Here we go. Indicative auditor strategy and annual plan for 25-26.
Thank you, Chair. I do find myself in a somewhat difficult position here in that I am presenting a plan, but we haven't actually necessarily got the contract going forward. But nevertheless, for the purpose of continuity, it's important that you get some kind of sense of the topics that's important to get assurance over. And this is presented very much in that vein. This again is kind of like version 2.5, so there were early discussions with Fiona before she left about things that she may or may not want in the plan. A version 1 came across, then shortly thereafter to Nigel, I want to say early January, something like that. And then executives have had a chance to provide some feedback in relation to that. That actually has been updated within this document and is provided to you with that intact. Now, I did just want to provide a couple of comments, partly in response to management feedback. It's entirely possible Nigel may shoot me, but worth noting that a couple of the topics were actually pushed out as a result of management feedback. I have highlighted those towards the end of the document, so on Appendix C, and those topics were HTIP, which has been, I mean, the response you can see there, but my view is that has actually been pushed from year to year previously. And then there is an unusual one as well, which is the maintenance, and that did get limited assurance last year. And I personally think it should be audited again next year, although perhaps towards the tail end. So those two audits being pushed out of the plan result in effectively a 23-day contingency. I'm not overly concerned, partly because we haven't necessarily got the contract next year, but also partly because this is not set in stone. And you do have the ability as the year drifts on to either move those topics in or to utilise those contingency days to do other topics. I don't propose to go through on a line-by-line basis. Some of these topics were topics that were inserted, 2 years ago. This is a 3/5-year rolling plan, as you know. I'm not going to talk through what I mean by 3/5 unless anybody comes back and asks. But essentially, it is important to note that the assurance is built up over a period of time. The days of the audit universe are long gone. You don't audit every topic in each year, but rather over 5 years you build up a bank of assurance across individual topics. I don't believe that it's particularly worth my time talking through each individual line. There is a section here which does provide a detailed scope against each of the topics, so you can see what would be done within each of those audits, and from that you can derive some sense of how value adding it would be. I do feel it probably is worth revisiting this topic after you've gone through your strategy, considered your objectives, and then thought about what assurance over those revised objectives would be, because ideally you would map the topics against the revised strategy and the risks against those strategies. And indeed, should we carry forward, that would be something we would do in a version 3 or 4 of this plan. I'll stop at that stage, but obviously if anyone does have any burning desire to have audits in respect of a particular area, do feel free to raise your voice now, or to contact Nigel, and I'm sure he would be happy to entertain any thoughts that you may have.
So a couple of comments. One for clarity for the committee. We are out to re-procure our internal audit services because the contract comes to an end at the end of March. And that process will be ending over the next few weeks. And there'll be an update to this committee in March in terms of the progress and where we're at with that, which is why Philip's alluding to the fact that it may not be TIA that are running our internal audit service for 2025-26. In terms of, I don't think the HTIP moving is a significant risk and wouldn't be posted strategic risks. The rationale for moving the property plant maintenance is because this is around the Cardo re-provision, and as of hopefully, as of September this year, we will have a new commissioned, or be in the process of finalising the recommissioning of a provider for that service, and mobilisation processes will be taking place from the current contractor to the new one, if there is a new one, or the current contractor to the new contract style. And it was felt that doing an audit whilst that was going on, whilst all the pieces are moving around, might not be as fruitful. And we can pick that conversation up, myself and Philip, prior to finishing it, but my aim would be to have that in the first quarter of the next financial year, so that we're hitting the new contract right on day one, so that we make sure that what's in the contract is being operated by the service. So it would be a matter of months that being delayed in, rather than a particularly long delay to where that audit sits. But welcome to audit comments.
Thank you. Comments? No. Okay, well, a few from me. One thing on I'm afraid it is individual line items that did stick out for me, is under ICT, that we've got a few, the internal audits on cybersecurity and support for new projects pushed out to year 3. But I know we've had a number of new IT projects. I know there's a few continuing. So it's surprising, well, to me that they're pushed out. Is there a background on that? Is there a particular reason?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just going through a cycle. I think they were audited like 2 years ago, and as I say, it's a 5-year plan. So, but there is definitely capacity within the plan to undertake those sooner if you desire to do so.
Well, I can only be speaking for myself on this. There are a number of objectives and issues we are trying to fix with new systems, particularly around our complaints, which is a major area that the council is perceived on. So for me, that would be something that I think should have some importance, and should be looked at sort of as soon as it's bedded down on that side. In terms of the other possible topics, one sort of thing that I think is very pertinent right now is that I want to make sure that all our services are operating as normal. By that I mean as a going concern. In the current environment, where there is, it is felt by a lot of people that Tier 2 authorities have a limited shelf life. I think as a councillor, I want to have assurance that officers' duties are being carried out to the highest level of diligence, regardless of the uncertainty of who's going to be responsible for them in the future. And so I'd like to see that reflected in the internal audit work process, just to make sure that is addressed on pretty much every audit that we're going to, if that makes sense. I will go on to my final point if I don't get anything else from feeding in. And then the other point is, again, on the evaluations that are being given in the way that services are being assessed, I didn't see any mention to that about alignment with the council's values and objectives. And that there are a few hopefully isolated examples where we feel that or it may be perceived that the outcomes that the council's teams were going after may not be in line with our stated objectives. So it is worth us sort of making sure that is part of the decision-making process.
Okay, I understand where you're coming from. I'll make a note of that. That's actually a slightly contentious issue for audit to get involved into for reasons that...
It is, but so essentially, what I'm trying to see is that if we are looking at a service, the prioritisation of how resources are used in that service is looking at what the council's objectives and values are. That's what I'm saying. So we're not necessarily trying to say whether somebody agrees with the values or whether they're that they have to do things sometimes counter. What we're trying to see is the process in which they undertake their things has that in mind. So it's almost seeing, you know, who has discretion for choosing what their priorities are.
Okay, that's a helpful clarification. Thank you.
Okay.
I've made notes, sorry.
Right.
It wasn't just randomly.
No worries. It's good, and hopefully Nigel's got them as well. So
yeah, no, I was going to say because that auditors, one of the natural things to do is audit process.
Yeah.
What's the process? What do you need to do? That will be designed by somebody and should be designed with the organisation's objectives and cultures at stake. Understanding whether individuals are completing those processes through the behaviours that we expect them to do is quite an interesting concept, because if the process has been set up and the process is correct, then, and they're following it, they're doing it as they were asked. And to be fair, when we do our internal audits and they look at processes, we'll feedback on whether the processes are robust, efficient and in line with your thinking. We just need to be very careful around where we go from process, the process is right and fit and proper and we're implementing it, and individuals and their approach.
So I just to come back on that. So I agree with you. What I would say is I have done analogous audits in, for example, in relation to the Nolan principles and the extent to which individuals embodied those desired characteristics. So it would be possible to extend that. Perhaps that's something we can discuss.
Yeah, something we can have a chat about.
Discuss. I'll clarify that you know, you are definitely thinking the same way that I am. I'm not necessarily thinking about individual offices, but I'm thinking about the individual functions. And obviously, generally, you're going to have a team leader on top of those functions. So there is the case that we are sort of looking at one individual as the leader of that team, but it is basically trying to say, how does that person prioritise you know, whether they respond to something, how they respond, and what resources they put towards it. That's essentially what we're trying to say. And the internal audit process, to me, would only highlight where that decision sits. You know, saying this person is responsible for that and knows they are responsible for it. You know, I wouldn't be trying to pull any areas we disagreed with. We would just be trying to make sure that, you know, the tree officer is there to try to preserve our trees, etc.
Decision-making review rather than a,
So in terms of next steps, we'll take a few of those ideas away and have a think about them as well. and feedback through to SLT, and we will bring a final programme through following the appointment of the new internal auditors, because they, whoever that may be, will have to approve what that programme is and make sure that it provides them with the governance and assurance that they want. But I think we've got a plan there by the sounds of it, apart from some minor tweaks, which might be something we could do in year anyway, that we can look to take forward.
Okay.
Yeah, Rick.
Oh, Councillor Silver.
Okay, no, I totally agree with Rick. It's cyber security. Of course, it's a process need to be correct, and a priority need to be listed. Cyber security is a huge subject, and how the technology is developing in the world, and AI. So yeah, it need to be put in the priorities.
I think we've got to separate out the work that's going on in cybersecurity and internal audit, because we had a very clean audit, 23-4 on cybersecurity, and there is a huge amount of work going on with the ICT team, linked in international databases as well as regional ones into constantly the threat of cybersecurity, which is huge. You know, let's not belittle it. There are genuinely attacks on the organisation's ICT all the time. And from that perspective, we are constantly doing various different tests and getting various different external agencies in to test some of our systems. And the cybersecurity, you know, seems to be delivering at this moment in time in terms of defence mechanisms. Having an internal audit on the processes is something you would do every few years, which is why it's in the back end of the programme, unless you felt there was an issue. And I think the previous audit didn't outline any issues. It's one of those, again, where you're balancing resources. If you get a clean audit, do you then do an audit another year or two later when actually you've got some areas, like we've got a couple of limited assurance areas that we're doing audits on next year, where they have highlighted some concerns or issues. And it's finding that balance between the resources that we have and the work that we want to do. I'm not saying cybersecurity isn't important, and that's the opposite of what I'm trying to say. It's incredibly important, and we are investing in it. But at this point in time, we didn't feel that there was an internal audit that would add value.
So if I may as well, so that thing about the use of resources is exactly right. You as an organisation only have a set amount of resources available, and from our perspective, the primary focus of our review is have those resources been deployed in a reasonable manner. For the overall cybersecurity review, you know, there's a few tick boxes and checklists and so on and so forth that augment that, but essentially what drives the thinking is have those resources been deployed effectively. And certainly I've done audits for councils where I've given no assurance for cybersecurity. So, you know, and we've had lively discussions at audit committee. But what I would say is you can direct the review to look at specific systems. You talk about new systems coming in, so you could say, well, rather than an organisation-wide cybersecurity review, you instead got audit to look at one or two new systems that have come in and check to see have the cybersecurity systems that, you know, would be expected by the council to be deployed, been deployed in those circumstances. Have you complied with the latest checklist, the latest requirements? Have you got assurances from any third-party organisations, you know, chains and protocols in play, that kind of thing? So it could be that rather than doing a organisation-wide review, actually a system-specific review might be a good way to kind of like balance out the concerns that councillors are raising and Nigel's desire to use internal audit scarce resources effectively.
Noted, and thank you. Just as an aside, I know I'm the one that asked the question. One of the answers I was anticipating getting, it hasn't been, but I was actually thinking that I was going to be told that the ICT team had their own system of penetration testing, reviews, etc. So effectively, the internal audit had done their thing, and now ICT is kind of doing their own testing. So it's merely the movement of it away from this programme.
And that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, rather than going into detail. I think they've done 2 rounds of penetration testing in the last 12 months. That's a really good tool for them to understand what's working and what not, which supports internal audit. That's what I was trying to say earlier on, in that the internal audit is great, but there's other things that the service are also doing that are testing that system.
Councillor Duris.
I think you said, if I heard you correctly and if I understood it correctly, you made a comment at the beginning about, if you like, the changes which are likely to come to local authorities as part of the devolution impact. And I think I detected, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you were perhaps implying that extra vigilance had to be provided over members of staff to make sure that they didn't slip away from their high standards as a result of the, if you like, the limbo nature of where we're going in terms of local government. And whilst I wouldn't disagree with that necessarily, I do think we need to be aware of the well-being and the morale of the staff. That if they are perceiving that their roles or their jobs may be in question at some stage in the future, the last thing that I would think they want to see, and the last thing in a way that I would want to see, is a level of hard oversight on them, making sure that they were doing what they should be doing, because it's my belief that generally, and it can get picked up in audit, internal audit, that they would be doing what they're doing in a very professional way. So it's just a plea not to be too overzealous, or not to be overzealous with them.
Yeah, to just feedback slightly, I guess. We are run as a going concern. We are a business that will carry on until a period of time when we're told we won't, and we don't know what that period of time will be. And so at the moment, it's business as usual. From a financial perspective, there is a huge amount of legislation and statute in place, a lot coming under my Section 151 role, which means that we carry on as is. You know, I need to set a medium-term financial plan that is sustainable in the medium term, irrelevant of external influences, and I need to set a budget that is sustainable, and I need to make sure we've got suitable reserves and suitable investment plans, etc., that again tick the boxes. Well, the other one as well is best value. Whenever we spend any money, any significant money, we've got to make sure that we've got best value for the taxpayer, and we're acting in their best interests, nobody else's, which is a key point in terms of that. And then again, you've got lots of statute around procurement, rules and regulations, how we're procuring, why we're procuring. And again, that's been tightened up this year with new procurement regulations coming in next month. So I think members can be very, rest assured that everything is carrying on as usual. In terms of officers, yes, there's going to be a whole communications programme. The leadership team were discussing that today in terms of keeping officers aware of what may or may not happen, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. But the vast majority of what this council does will still be done in 5 years' time. The bins will still be collected, the parks will still be maintained, the streets will still be cleaned. Those roles aren't going to go away because you change who sends those individuals out to do those jobs. So the vast majority of that will carry on, at least in the short and medium term, until a new entity decides they want to do things differently. And that will be at the behest of politicians and democratic process, as it always is.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Greenfield.
May I ask a process question? As I understand internal audit in the corporate world, internal audit would be about the process. So do we have the right number of people in the right departments doing the right job? And performance of individuals would be covered by the HR process in terms of, how they are performing to deliver the council's objectives. Is that the same in the council? So from the perspective of this question, internal audit would only look at the processes, and if there were any performance issues with individuals, that would be looked at by the HR team in the performance management process.
I'll ask Philip and Nigel to respond.
Yeah, no, it's not the case. And it's not always the case in the private sector either. I have worked in the private sector as well. But you're right, like large swathes of the private sector, that absolutely is how internal audit work. They focus on the policies and processes. They largely produce work on the the basis of compliance, and the output might inform assurance, but it is aligned primarily around process compliance. In the public sector, and I've been doing this for 30 odd years in the public sector, that isn't the case. So it's always been a more holistic, risk-based process, primarily focused around the objectives of whatever it is that we're asked to look at. Then we look at the risks in relation to that, then we look at the controls over those risks. But while we're doing so, we might do some compliance testing. Typically, compliance testing is only about 30% of the work that we do on any given audit. If it's about 60 to 70%, we will often issue what's called compliance-based output. And so those will be specifically narrated as compliance-based audits. This organisation actually doesn't request many compliance-based reports because they value the assurance-based pieces of work that we undertake. And we will typically undertake benchmarking against other organisations. And I would also say that in the private sector generally, the specialists who undertake that work are specific to those organisations. They're employed as in-house teams, whereas we undertake work at many different organisations, not just councils, but education and NHS as well. So we look to take the best practice of whatever we see across those organisations, and where appropriate, advise organisations what they should or shouldn't adopt within their own. I would say there is greater variety of the audits that we undertake, so less standardised outputs. I would undertake typically across my team something like 300 different types of audits on a given year, whereas in the private sector you would typically undertake an audit on very similar things again and again. Basically, it's a process audit in relation to the production of widgets. So we form a kind of like core part of an assurance process and output that Nigel would rely on for drawing his own opinion at the year end, and you'll see that alluded to within the financial accounts. And that's much less the case for audit in the private sector. For what it's worth, I think that means to an extent that I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. So I will plead guilty as charged in respect of that. But I would say I've balanced that by the fact that I've been doing the thing quite passionately for about 30 years. And so while I might not necessarily see the same thing as regularly, it's rare that I come across a topic where I can't draw an analogous comparison elsewhere. So it's very different in terms of both what it's used for, who it's used by, and how it should be understood.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Very thorough answer. Just checking if Nigel's got anything to say. I'm thinking that's probably well covered it. Okay. Any further questions on agenda item 9? Okay, so thank you, Philip, and your team. And we'll go on to a final item for the night, which is our absolute star of the show, the treasure management strategy. And Claire, I'm guessing you're taking this one.
Yeah, this is our annual treasury management strategy. So our 25-26 strategy is very much in line with what we carried forward from 24-25, just in terms of looking at our capital and our management of all of our investments, etc. And then the second part of it is how we're achieving and what we're doing for 24-25, and we're meeting all our Prudential indicators and always looking healthy and strong. So just if there's any questions.
Any questions or comments from the floor?
One thing I will allude the group to, just in case of change, we are likely to revise our treasury management strategy in year as part of our medium-term financial strategy. Not for any other reason than I think it might be more appropriate to revise our capital programme and our investment strategy as part of the MTFS rather than budget setting, because they're more aligned, and also because there's likely to be more investment decisions over the next few months, which will probably significantly change both those. So it would make sense to update them. That's not written in stone. If there are no different decisions made over the next 3-4 months, then we won't revise them. But that is what we're thinking at the moment.
I will just sort of pick up on Claire's language, you stating that our Treasury position is healthy and strong. However, we are still expecting that the rates available in the market are taking a reasonably significant reduction, and our cash balances to make use of that are expected to decline. So we're still consistent with earlier expectations that our performance will go down, but
nothing out of what we're expecting and been looking at in terms of the last few years. So.
And obviously there is quite a lot happening in the global economy right at the moment, which makes a number of things hard to predict. Okay. Once again, we've had a very thorough and detailed report there. There's quite a lot to go into. Has anybody got any questions or feedback on the strategy?
It's just same as it's always been, really. Invest in UK banks and invest in cash, and that's it, really. There's nothing really. We don't want it being exciting, do we? We want access to our cash. We want it to be stable. We want a reasonable return. So that's really it. That's a very conservative and prudent strategy.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you, Claire, for the report. So the committee notes and accepts that. And with that, we can close the meeting off. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.